Have you ever met someone who seemed incredibly charming at first, but somehow after spending more time with them, you started questioning yourself? Maybe they crossed a small boundary and acted like it was nothing. Maybe they disappeared just to see whether you'd chase them. Maybe they said something hurtful, then somehow made you feel guilty for being hurt. And the strange part is, none of these moments seemed serious enough on their own, but together they created a pattern. Because people with strong narcissistic traits don't always reveal themselves through obvious arrogance or dramatic behavior. Sometimes they test people quietly. They test what you'll tolerate. They test how quickly you'll forgive. They test whether they can control your emotions. And most importantly, they test how much access they can have to you. Today we're going to look at 6 common ways this can happen. And the goal isn't to diagnose someone from a few behaviors. It's to help you recognize patterns that can become unhealthy or manipulative, because you don't need to prove that someone is a narcissist before you're allowed to protect yourself. 1. They test your boundaries. The first test is often incredibly small. They ask for something you've already said you don't want to give. They interrupt you. They make an inappropriate joke. They show up late repeatedly. They pressure you after you've already said no. And then they watch what happens. If you enforce your boundary, they learn that you have limits. But if you give in, they learn something very different. They learn that your no might actually mean keep asking. This is why small boundary violations matter. Not because every inconsiderate action is evidence of narcissism, but because repeated boundary pushing tells you something about how a person responds when their wants conflict with yours. A healthy person might be disappointed by your boundary, but they can respect it. A manipulative person may try to negotiate it, mock it, guilt you over it, or simply ignore it. And if you repeatedly reward that behavior by giving in, the behavior can become stronger. So pay attention to what happens after you say no. That's often more revealing than what happens when you say yes. 2. They test how quickly you'll forgive. The second test involves forgiveness. Everyone makes mistakes. Healthy relationships require forgiveness. But there's a major difference between making a mistake and repeatedly doing something harmful because you believe the other person will eventually forgive you. Someone might hurt you, apologize, promise they'll change. And for a while, everything seems better. Then the same behavior happens again. Another apology follows, another promise, another second chance. Eventually, you may notice something uncomfortable. The apology isn't changing the behavior. It's simply resetting the relationship. And this is where forgiveness can become a trap. If someone discovers that they can hurt you, apologize, and immediately regain full access to you, there may be very little incentive for them to change. So don't only listen to apologies. Watch what happens afterward. Real accountability produces behavioral change. Words can sound sincere. Patterns are harder to fake. 3. They test how easily they can trigger you. The third test is emotional. Some people learn exactly which buttons to push. They know what makes you angry. They know what makes you insecure. They know what makes you feel rejected. And sometimes they'll deliberately touch those sensitive areas just to watch your reaction. A small comment, a sarcastic remark, a comparison to someone else, a carefully timed criticism. Then they wait. And if you react strongly, they may suddenly become calm. Now you're angry. They're calm, and somehow the conversation is no longer about what they said. It's about how you reacted. This creates a dangerous psychological shift. You spend the conversation defending your reaction instead of addressing the original behavior. That's why emotional regulation can become a form of protection. Not because you should tolerate disrespect, but because you don't want someone else's provocation to control your behavior. The calmer you become, the harder it is for someone to steer the conversation using your emotions. 4. They withdraw attention to see if you'll chase them. The fourth test is something many people experience without immediately recognizing it. Suddenly the attention disappears. The messages become shorter. The affection changes. They become distant. And you start wondering, did I do something? So you reach out. You explain. You apologize. You try harder, and then, suddenly, they're warm again. This can create a powerful psychological cycle. Attention disappears. You become anxious. You chase. Attention returns. Your brain experiences relief, And because relief feels so powerful after uncertainty, you may become even more attached to the person. This is one reason inconsistent attention can feel strangely addictive. You're not simply enjoying affection, you're anticipating its return. And that distinction matters. Healthy relationships don't require you to constantly earn someone's warmth. People can need space, people can become busy, people can have difficult days. But when withdrawal is repeatedly used to punish you or make you chase them, the relationship starts becoming a psychological game. And you don't have to participate. Sometimes the healthiest response to withdrawal is simply not to chase. 5. They test your sense of reality. The fifth test is more subtle. They say something hurtful. You confront them. And suddenly they insist it never happened, or they tell you that you're remembering it incorrectly. You're too sensitive, you're imagining things, you're making a big deal out of nothing. One conversation may simply involve two people remembering something differently. That's normal. But repeated patterns of denying obvious events, twisting conversations, or making you constantly doubt your own memory can become deeply destabilizing. You start asking yourself, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I really am too sensitive. And once you stop trusting your own perception, you're much easier to influence. That's why it's important to stay connected to reality outside the relationship. Write things down when necessary. Talk to people you trust. Look at patterns rather than isolated arguments. And most importantly, don't automatically assume you're wrong simply because someone confidently tells you that you are. Confidence isn't proof. 6. They test how much access. They have to you. The sixth test may be the most important. How much access do they have to your time, your attention, your emotions, your forgiveness, your secrets, your availability? Some people gradually learn that you'll answer every call. You'll cancel your plans. You'll forgive almost anything. You'll explain yourself endlessly. You'll always come back. And once someone knows they have unlimited access to you, they may stop treating that access as something valuable. This is why boundaries aren't about punishing people. They're about controlling access. You can care about someone without being available 24 hours a day. You can love someone without accepting every behavior. You can forgive someone without immediately trusting them again. And you can understand someone's struggles without allowing those struggles to become an excuse for repeatedly hurting you. Access should be earned through mutual respect, not assumed, because someone knows you'll always be there. The pattern behind all 6, now here's where things become important. One behavior doesn't make someone a narcissist. Everyone can be selfish sometimes. Everyone can become defensive. Everyone can make mistakes. Everyone can have a bad day. The real warning sign is the pattern. Does this person repeatedly cross boundaries? Do they punish you for saying no? Do they apologize without changing? Do they deliberately provoke you? Do they make affection conditional? Do they repeatedly make you question your own perception? Do they expect unlimited access to you while giving little respect in return? When several of these patterns appear together, the question isn't necessarily, are they a narcissist? A better question is, what is this relationship doing to me? Are you becoming more anxious, more confused, more isolated, more afraid to speak honestly? Are you constantly monitoring your words because you're afraid of their reaction? Are you spending more time managing their emotions than living your own life? Those questions can tell you much more than a label. What should you do? You don't have to outsmart a manipulative person. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to win the argument. And you don't need to convince them that their behavior is wrong. Instead, make your boundaries clear. Keep your responses calm. Stop over-explaining. Pay attention to behavior instead of promises. Protect your private information. Maintain relationships outside the situation. And most importantly, be willing to act when your boundaries are repeatedly ignored. Because a boundary without action is often just a request. You can say, I'm not comfortable with that. If you speak to me that way, I'm ending this conversation. I've already answered that. I'm not available. I don't want to discuss this. And then follow through. You don't need anger to make a boundary powerful. You need consistency. Final thought. The most important thing to remember is this. You don't need to prove that someone is a narcissist before you decide that their behavior isn't healthy for you. Labels can be useful, but patterns are more important. Watch how someone responds when you say no. Watch how they behave when they don't get what they want. Watch whether their apologies produce change. Watch whether they respect your boundaries when there is nothing in it for them. Because character isn't revealed when everything goes their way. It's revealed when it doesn't. And if someone repeatedly makes you feel that you have to sacrifice your peace just to keep the relationship stable, the answer isn't always to become better at managing them. Sometimes the answer is to stop giving them so much power over you, because the healthiest relationships don't require you to constantly prove your loyalty. They don't require you to abandon your boundaries, and they don't make you afraid to be yourself. You don't have to win the psychological game, you can simply choose not to play it.